$5 million. Elena couldn't breathe. Who would pay $5 million for an envelope? What could possibly be inside? But all around her, people were whispering urgently. They leaned close to each other. Some pulled out phones and made quick calls. Others waved to people across the room. Something about this envelope made everyone nervous and excited. A paddle went up near the front. $5 million, someone called out. Elena couldn't see who it was. The crowd blocked her view, but the auctioneer nodded and pointed. The price was now $5 million. Another paddle rose. $6 million. This voice was strong and confident. A man's voice. The auctioneer smiled and nodded again. $7 million, someone else shouted. Then $8 million from across the room. The bidding moved so fast Elena could barely follow. The numbers climbed higher and higher. $10 million, $12 million, $15 million. The room felt electric with energy. This wasn't like the other items. This was different. People wanted this envelope desperately. Elena squinted at the screen, trying to see the symbol more clearly. The image was large, but the symbol was small and detailed. It looked like a bird, maybe an eagle, with something in its claws. Or maybe it was a ship. She couldn't tell for sure. But it looked so familiar. Where had she seen it before? She thought about her grandmother again. Rosa Martinez had been a quiet woman. She didn't talk much about her past. Elena remembered asking her once about the Castellano family. She had been maybe 11 or 12 years old. They were looking through old photo albums. There was a picture of her grandmother in front of a huge mansion. "Grandma, whose house is that?" Elena had asked. Her grandmother's face had changed. She looked sad and scared at the same time. "That was where I worked. A long time ago. It's so big. Were they nice to you?" Her grandmother had closed the album quickly. "Don't ask about them, Elena. That part of my life is over. Some things are better left in the past." Elena had never asked again, but she remembered the fear in her grandmother's eyes. What had happened in that house? Why wouldn't she talk about it? The bidding continued. $20 million, a woman's voice rang out. Elena could see her now. She wore a green dress that sparkled like emeralds. Her hair was pulled back tight. She held her paddle up high with confidence. Next to her, a man in a dark suit whispered in her ear. He looked like a lawyer or advisor. $22 million, came another bid. This was from a different man. He was younger, maybe in his 40s. He wore glasses and an expensive suit. Elena recognized him from somewhere. Maybe she had seen his picture in the newspaper. He looked like someone important. A businessman or tech company owner. The woman in green bid again. $25 million. The younger man responded immediately. $28 million. Back and forth they went. The rest of the room watched in silence. Even the people who had been whispering earlier were quiet now. Everyone stared at these two bidders like they were watching a tennis match. The paddle went up on one side, then the other side. The price kept climbing. $30 million, the woman in green announced. Her voice was steady, but Elena could see tension in her shoulders. She wanted this envelope badly. The younger man hesitated. He turned to someone sitting next to him. They talked quietly. Elena watched his face. He looked worried now. $30 million was a lot of money, even for rich people. He seemed to be deciding if it was worth it. Finally, he shook his head and put down his paddle. He was out of the bidding. The woman in green smiled slightly. She thought she had won. The auctioneer raised his hand. "We have $30 million. Going once, that's when Elena saw it. The screen flickered slightly and the image zoomed in a little. The symbol on the envelope became clearer. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She knew that symbol. She had definitely seen it before. It was on the letters in her grandmother's box. The wax seal on those old letters had the exact same design. Her mind raced. If her grandmother had letters with that symbol, and this envelope had the same symbol, they must be connected. They must be from the same place or the same people. But why? What did her grandmother have? And why was this envelope worth millions of dollars? Going twice, the auctioneer continued. Elena thought about her grandmother's sudden departure from the Castellano family. She had left that job in 1989. Elena knew because there were documents about it in the boxes. Her grandmother had worked there for many years, and then suddenly she stopped. She had come home to her family and never worked for wealthy people again. She had taken a job at a laundry service instead. Why would she leave such a good job? And there was something else. Elena's mother had gone to college. That was unusual for their family. They were poor. College was expensive, but somehow her mother had been able to go to a good school. When Elena had asked about it once, her mother had just said, "Your grandmother wanted me to have opportunities she never had. She saved money for years. But what if it wasn't savings? What if the Castellano family had paid her grandmother? What if they had paid her to leave and stay quiet about something? Sold for 30 million, the auctioneer began. Elena's hand went up. She didn't plan it. She didn't think about it. Her body just moved on its own. The paddle with number 63 rose into the air above her head. 35 million, Elena heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. It sounded loud and clear and confident, but inside her heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. The entire ballroom went silent. It was like someone had pressed a pause button on the whole world. Every single person turned to look at Elena. Hundreds of eyes stared at her. The woman in green turned around in her seat. The younger man with glasses stood up to see better. Even the waiters stopped moving. The silence felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. Elena kept her hand up, holding the paddle steady. She had no idea what she was doing. She didn't have $35 million. She didn't even have $35,000. Her savings account had maybe $3,000, and that was for emergencies. But something told her this was important. The way everyone reacted when they saw the envelope. The way they bid so desperately. The connection to her grandmother. There was a mystery here, and Elena needed to understand it. The auctioneer looked confused. He stared at Elena with his mouth slightly open. He looked at his assistant standing at the side of the stage. The assistant shrugged. They didn't know what to do. I'm sorry, miss, the auctioneer finally said. His voice wasn't smooth anymore. He sounded nervous. But this is a registered bidder auction. Do you have credentials? Elena stood up slowly. Her legs felt shaky, but she made them strong. She held up the paddle so everyone could see the number clearly. Paddle 63, she said firmly. I'm registered. She wasn't lying exactly. The paddle was on her seat. Someone had registered for that seat. It just wasn't her. But nobody knew that. And right now, Elena wanted to see what would happen. She wanted to know why these rich people were so desperate for this envelope. She wanted to know what it had to do with her grandmother. The younger man in glasses stood up completely now. His chair scraped loudly against the floor in the quiet room. His face was red with anger. He pointed at Elena. This is ridiculous, he shouted. Security! This woman doesn't belong here. She obviously doesn't have the money to bid. She's disrupting the auction. Other people started talking too. The whispers grew louder. Some people nodded in agreement with the angry man. Others just stared at Elena with curiosity. Who was this simple woman in the cheap dress who dared to bid millions of dollars? The woman in green turned fully around in her chair. She studied Elena carefully from head to toe. Elena felt like she was being examined under a microscope. The woman's eyes were cold and calculating. She was trying to figure out who Elena was and why she was bidding. Elena felt fear rising in her chest. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she should sit down and apologize and leave. But then she thought about her grandmother. Rosa Martinez had been scared of these people. She had kept secrets for them, and then she had left suddenly and never spoken about it again. Elena deserved to know why. Her family deserved to know the truth. The auctioneer looked to the side of the stage again. A man in a suit was walking toward him quickly. He looked important, like he was in charge. The auctioneer leaned down and the man whispered in his ear. They talked quietly while the whole room watched and waited. Elena stood very still. She kept holding the paddle up. Her arm was getting tired, but she didn't lower it. She needed to show them she was serious. She needed them to believe she meant what she said, even though she had no idea how she would pay if she actually won. Elena Martinez stood outside the Hartwell Grand Hotel, staring at the golden invitation in her hands. She read it again, making sure she wasn't dreaming. The thick paper felt expensive between her fingers. It invited someone to an exclusive charity auction tonight at 7 o'clock. But Elena knew this invitation wasn't meant for her. She lived in apartment 7B in a small building on Maple Street. The invitation was addressed to apartment 7B, but there was another building next door, a luxury building with a penthouse also numbered 7B. Someone had made a mistake. The mailman had probably mixed up the addresses. Elena should have returned it or thrown it away. But something made her curious. What did rich people do at these fancy events? How did they live? Elena looked down at her simple navy blue dress. She had bought it on sale 3 years ago. It was the nicest thing she owned. She wore it to parent-teacher meetings and important school events. Her black shoes were comfortable but old. Her purse was brown leather, scratched and worn from years of use. She didn't look like someone who belonged at a luxury hotel auction, but Elena was a teacher. She was curious by nature. She wanted to see this world just once. Maybe nobody would notice her. She could sit in the back and watch quietly. What was the worst that could happen? They would ask her to leave and she would go home. She had nothing to lose. Elena walked through the hotel's golden doors. Inside, everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The floor was made of white marble that reflected the lights. Huge flower arrangements stood on tall tables. The flowers looked exotic and expensive. Elena had never seen anything like them in the grocery store. People moved through the lobby wearing clothes that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Women wore long gowns covered in jewels. Their jewelry caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the walls. Men wore perfectly fitted suits and shiny watches. Everyone looked important and wealthy. Everyone except Elena. She followed signs that pointed to the grand ballroom. A woman in a black uniform stood at the entrance checking invitations. Elena's heart beat faster. This was the moment. The woman would probably stop her. But Elena showed her invitation with confidence. The woman barely looked at it. She just nodded and waved Elena inside. The ballroom was even more amazing than the lobby. Round tables filled the room, each covered with white cloth and decorated with candles. A stage stood at the front with a podium and a large screen. Soft music played from somewhere. Waiters moved between tables carrying trays of champagne and fancy food on tiny plates. Elena found an empty seat near the back. She tried to make herself small and invisible. Around her, people talked and laughed. They knew each other. They called out greetings and kissed cheeks. They talked about trips to Paris and new yachts and summer homes. Elena just listened. This was like watching a movie about rich people, except it was real. A woman at the next table wore a dress covered in silver sequins. Her necklace had diamonds as big as grapes. She was laughing at something a man said. The man wore a suit that looked like it was made just for him. His cufflinks sparkled with what Elena thought might be real rubies. These people lived in a completely different world. Elena noticed a small number on her seat. It was attached to a wooden paddle. The number was 63. She picked it up and looked at it. This must be how people bid at auctions. She had seen auctions on television. People raised these paddles when they wanted to buy something. Elena held it carefully. She wouldn't be bidding on anything tonight. She couldn't afford a sandwich from this hotel, much less auction items. The lights dimmed slightly. People began taking their seats. The chatter grew quieter. A man in an elegant suit walked onto the stage. He stood at the podium and smiled at the crowd. He welcomed everyone to the annual charity auction. He talked about the good cause they were supporting, something about funding arts programs for children. The crowd clapped politely. Then the auction began. The first item appeared on the big screen. It was a week-long vacation at a private island in the Caribbean. The auctioneer described the beautiful beaches and the luxury villa. He said the starting bid was $50,000. $50,000. Elena felt dizzy. That was more than she earned in a whole year teaching second grade. But paddles shot up around the room immediately. People bid like they were buying groceries. The price climbed quickly. 60,000. 75,000. 100,000. A woman in red finally won it for $120,000. She smiled and clapped her hands like she had won a toy at a carnival. More items came and went. A vintage Ferrari sold for $2 million. A painting by a famous artist went for $3.5 million. A diamond necklace that once belonged to a princess sold for $4.2 million. Elena couldn't believe what she was seeing. These people had so much money that millions of dollars meant nothing to them. She thought about her students. Many of them came from poor families. Some didn't have enough food at home. Elena often bought snacks for her classroom with her own money. She knew families who struggled to pay rent and buy school supplies. And here, people were spending millions on paintings and jewelry and vacations. But Elena wasn't angry. She was just fascinated. This was education too, in a way. She was learning about a world she had only read about in books. She watched carefully, taking mental notes. Maybe she would tell her students about this someday. Maybe it would inspire them to work hard and dream big. The auctioneer announced the next item. Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to lot 17. This is something truly special. The screen changed. Instead of a picture of jewelry or a car, it showed a simple envelope. The envelope was old and yellowed. It was sealed with red wax. In the corner was a small symbol that Elena couldn't quite see clearly. Across the front, written in fancy script, were the words, "The Castellano Collection." Elena leaned forward. That name, Castellano. Why did she know that name? Her mind raced backward through memories. Then she remembered. Her grandmother Rosa had worked for a family named Castellano. She had been their housekeeper many years ago, back before Elena was born. The auctioneer's voice pulled her attention back. He was explaining that this envelope contained something extremely valuable. He said the contents were verified and authentic, but he didn't say what was inside. He called it mysterious and important. He said collectors had been searching for this collection for decades. Elena stared at the screen. The symbol on the envelope looked familiar. She thought about the boxes in her storage unit. When her grandmother died 10 years ago, Elena had kept some of her belongings, old photos, letters, and papers. She had never looked through everything carefully, but she remembered seeing letters with wax seals. Could they have the same symbol? The auctioneer announced the starting bid. "We'll begin at $5 million. The room exploded with noise. The man who had been whispering to the auctioneer straightened up. He looked directly at Elena with cold eyes. Then he nodded to someone at the back of the room. Elena saw 2 security guards start walking toward her. Her stomach dropped. They were going to throw her out. But before the guards could reach her, Elena spoke again. Her voice was louder this time. She wanted everyone to hear. $40 million, she said clearly. The security guards stopped walking. The whole room gasped. Someone dropped a glass and it shattered on the marble floor. The sound was loud in the shocked silence. Nobody could believe what they were hearing. This strange woman in her cheap dress had just bid $40 million. The younger man in glasses looked like he might explode with anger. His face turned even redder. He started walking toward Elena, pushing past chairs and people. His security team followed him. They were big men in dark suits with earpieces. They looked like they could throw Elena out easily. "This is completely absurd," the man shouted as he walked. "I am Marcus Chen. I own half the tech companies in this city. I know everyone here. Nobody knows this woman. She's lying. She doesn't have $40, let alone $40 million. Remove her immediately." People nodded. They agreed with Marcus Chen. Elena could see it in their faces. They thought she was crazy or playing a joke. She didn't belong in their world and they wanted her gone. But Elena refused to move. She stood her ground and held the paddle steady. Marcus Chen got closer. He was only a few tables away now. His guards were reaching for Elena when she spoke again. "My grandmother was Rosa Martinez," Elena said loudly. Everyone could hear her. She was the head housekeeper for the Castellano family from 1962 to 1989. She worked in their mansion for 27 years. That stopped Marcus Chen in his tracks. His angry expression changed to something else. Fear? Surprise? Elena couldn't tell exactly, but he definitely looked worried now. He glanced at the woman in the green dress. She was staring at Elena with wide eyes. Other people in the room started whispering urgently. Elena continued. She needed to say everything before they threw her out. "My grandmother left that job very suddenly in 1989. She never explained why. But she kept boxes of papers and letters from that time. Letters with a wax seal that looks exactly like the symbol on that envelope." She pointed at the screen. The envelope was still displayed there, large and clear for everyone to see. The red wax seal with its intricate symbol glowed in the projection light. "I think I know what's in that envelope," Elena said. Her voice was shaking a little now, but she kept talking. "And I think everyone in this room knows too. That's why you're all so scared. That's why you bid millions of dollars without even knowing exactly what you're buying. You're not buying treasure. You're buying silence," the room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Some people stood up. Others pulled out their phones. The noise was overwhelming. The auctioneer banged his gavel on the podium, trying to restore order, but nobody listened to him. Marcus Chen's face had gone from red to pale. He looked sick. The woman in green was talking rapidly to the man next to her. He was writing things down on a paper. Other people were arguing with each other. Some were heading for the exits. The whole auction had fallen into chaos. Elena's legs felt weak. She wanted to sit down, but she forced herself to stay standing. She had started this. She had to see it through. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew it was important. These people were terrified, and it was because of something her grandmother had known about. Then someone new stood up. He was sitting in the very front row where Elena hadn't been able to see him before. He was an old man, probably in his 70s. He had white hair and wore an expensive suit. He used a cane to help himself stand, but his back was straight and his eyes were sharp. When he stood, the room gradually became quieter. People stopped talking and turned to look at him. He was clearly someone important. Enough, the old man said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the ballroom. Everyone could hear him. This circus needs to stop. He turned slowly to face Elena. His eyes locked onto hers. Elena felt cold under his gaze. This man had power. She could feel it radiating from him. "Young lady," he said, his voice calm but dangerous. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it ends now. I'm Alessandro Castellano, Jr. That envelope contains property that belongs to my family. It was stolen from our estate in 1989. He paused and let that sink in. Then he continued, looking directly at Elena. "The same year as you mentioned that your grandmother Rosa left our employment quite suddenly. She left in the middle of the night without notice. She took things that didn't belong to her." Elena felt anger rising in her chest. "My grandmother never stole anything in her life. She was honest and hardworking." Alessandro Castellano smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Then perhaps you can explain why she left so suddenly. Why she refused to return our calls? Why she moved to a different part of the city and changed her phone number?" Elena didn't have answers to those questions. She had always wondered the same things. But she knew her grandmother. Rosa Martinez had been a good woman. She had raised her daughter alone. She had helped raise Elena too. She had worked hard every day of her life. She wouldn't steal. "Maybe she left because she saw something she wasn't supposed to see," Elena said. The words came out before she could stop them. "Maybe you paid her to disappear and keep quiet. Maybe that's how my mother afforded college." Alessandro's smile disappeared. His eyes went cold and hard. Several people in the room gasped. Marcus Chen looked like he wanted to run. The woman in green had gone pale. "You should be very careful with your accusations," Alessandro said quietly. "You have no proof of anything. You're making wild guesses based on an old woman's papers that are probably worthless. Then why does everyone in this room look so scared?" Elena shot back. "If there's nothing to hide, why bid $30 million for an envelope? Why is Marcus Chen angry? Why is that woman in green looking like she might faint? What are you also afraid of?" Alessandro took a step closer to her, leaning on his cane. "I'll tell you what I'm afraid of, Ms. Martinez. I'm afraid of foolish people making trouble where there is none. I'm afraid of someone disrupting an important charity event with wild theories and false claims." He raised his own paddle. Elena noticed he had been sitting in seat number 1. Of course he had. The most important seat for the most important person. $100 million, Alessandro announced. His voice was clear and strong. "Right now. Final bid. Let's end this nonsense." The auctioneer looked relieved. He raised his gavel. "We have $100 million from Mr. Castellano. This is highly irregular, but given the circumstances—" "Wait," another voice called out. It was the woman in green. She stood up, her chair scraping back. $120 million. Alessandro turned to look at her. His expression was angry. "Victoria, what are you doing?" "What I have to do," Victoria replied. Her voice shook slightly, but she kept her paddle up. "My family is at risk too, Alessandro. You're not the only one with secrets in that envelope." "Victoria Ashford, sit down," Alessandro commanded. "We can discuss this privately." "No," Victoria said firmly. "I'm tired of being told what to do. I'm tired of living in fear of the past. I'm bidding." Marcus Chen suddenly raised his paddle too. $150 million, he called out. "If we're all being honest about our desperation, let's really be honest." Alessandro looked furious. He glared at Marcus and Victoria. "You're both fools. This changes nothing." "It changes everything," Marcus replied. "This woman here, Rosa Martinez's granddaughter, she's right. We're not buying the collection. We're buying silence. And I'm tired of it too, but I'll pay to make sure that silence stays bought." Elena watched all of this with growing shock. 3 of the richest people in the city were fighting over this envelope. They were bidding hundreds of millions of dollars. And they were admitting that they had secrets. Her grandmother had been right to be scared. Whatever was in that envelope was dangerous. The auctioneer looked completely lost. He turned to the man in the suit who had whispered to him earlier. The man shook his head. He had no idea what to do either. This auction had gone completely wrong. Elena's mind was racing. She needed to think. She couldn't actually pay $40 million. She couldn't pay any amount. But she had uncovered something important. These people were guilty of something. Something bad enough that they would pay hundreds of millions to hide it. She thought about her grandmother again. Rosa had kept those letters and papers for a reason. She had kept them safe all those years. Maybe she had been protecting them. Maybe she had been waiting for the right time to reveal them. But she died before she could, and now it was up to Elena. Before Elena could decide what to do next, the ballroom doors burst open. Everyone turned to look. A woman walked in, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She was in her 60s, elegant in a silver gown. Her gray hair was perfectly styled. She walked with confidence and authority. Elena recognized her from newspaper photos and society pages. This was Margaret Hartwell. She owned this hotel. She owned the auction house. She was one of the richest and most powerful women in the entire city. Margaret Hartwell's office was on the top floor of the hotel. It was bigger than Elena's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city lights sparkling below. The furniture looked expensive and antique. Paintings hung on the walls in gold frames. A huge desk sat near the windows, made of dark wood that gleamed in the soft lighting. Elena sat in a leather chair that was probably worth more than her car. Across from her sat Alessandro Castellano, Marcus Chen, and Victoria Ashford. They all looked uncomfortable. They didn't want to be here. They especially didn't want to be here with Elena. Margaret Hartwell sat behind her desk, watching them all with calm, intelligent eyes. "Let me start," Margaret said, folding her hands on the desk, "by telling you all that I know exactly what's in that envelope. I've known for years." Alessandro's head snapped up. "That's impossible. We sealed those documents ourselves. We watched them being placed in storage." "You watched some documents being stored," Margaret corrected, "but my father made copies first. He was a careful man. He believed in insurance. Your father?" Victoria leaned forward. "Thomas Hartwell knew about the Castellano collection?" "My father was part of it," Margaret said simply. "He was involved in everything you all did in the 1980s. The smuggling operations, the illegal imports, the payoffs to officials, everything." Elena felt confused. "Smuggling? What were you smuggling?" Marcus Chen laughed bitterly. "Does it matter? We were young and stupid and greedy. We thought we could get away with anything." "Tell her the truth," Margaret said firmly. "If we're going to resolve this, everything needs to be out in the open." Alessandro Castellano sighed. He suddenly looked very old and tired. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he looked at Elena. "In the 1980s, my father ran a shipping company," he began. "We transported goods all over the world. Legitimate goods mostly. But there was more money to be made in other things. Things that customs officials didn't need to know about." "What kind of things?" Elena asked. "Art," Victoria answered. "Stolen art from South America and Asia. Historical artifacts that belonged in museums. We bought them cheap from thieves and smugglers, then sold them to rich collectors. Not just art," Marcus added. "Also weapons. Small arms that we sold to people who shouldn't have had them. And other items. Luxury goods stolen from ships. Whatever made money." Elena felt sick. These people had built their entire fortunes on crime, and her grandmother had known about it. "Your grandmother worked in my father's house," Alessandro continued. "She was just a housekeeper. She cleaned rooms and did laundry. We never thought she paid attention to anything. But she was smart, your grandmother. Much smarter than we gave her credit for." "What did she find?" Elena asked. "Everything," Margaret answered. "Rosa found my father's ledgers. Records of every shipment, every transaction, every payoff. She found photographs of the stolen goods. She found letters between all of our fathers, planning their operations. She documented everything." Alessandro's face was dark with anger. "She was supposed to destroy it. My father paid her well, very well. We gave her enough money to send her daughter to college. We gave her a small house. We made sure she never had to work hard again. All she had to do was give us the documents and forget what she saw. But she didn't destroy them. Elena said slowly. Understanding was dawning on her. She kept copies. Yes, Margaret confirmed. Smart woman. She knew that keeping copies was her only protection. If you all ever came after her, she could threaten to expose everything. It kept her safe all these years. Victoria stood up and walked to the windows. She looked out at the city. We've lived in fear for 35 years. Every time there was a news story about old crimes, we worried. Every time someone mentioned the Castellano name, we held our breath. We've paid millions to keep things quiet. We've destroyed evidence. We've threatened journalists and investigators. We've built our entire lives on a foundation of lies, Marcus said quietly. I inherited my father's tech company. It was started with money from those smuggling operations. Every dollar I've made comes from that dirty money. Victoria's family invested their smuggling profits in oil. Alessandro's family still runs the shipping company, now legitimate but built on criminal wealth. And my father built this hotel empire, Margaret added, with money from helping you all hide your crimes. He was the middleman, the one who connected buyers and sellers. He took his cut from every deal. Elena tried to process all of this information. It was overwhelming. These people were billionaires. They were powerful. They owned companies and buildings and had influence over the entire city, but it was all built on crimes committed decades ago. The envelope being auctioned tonight, Elena said. That's the original documents? The ones my grandmother was supposed to destroy? Yes, Alessandro answered. We thought they were safely locked away, but somehow they ended up being put in the auction. Someone made a mistake, or... He looked at Margaret suspiciously. Or someone did it on purpose. Margaret didn't deny it. She just smiled slightly. Let's say I'm tired of carrying my father's secrets. He died 5 years ago. I'm not obligated to protect him anymore. You put them in the auction? Victoria spun around from the window. You risked exposing all of us? I gave you a chance to buy them back, Margaret replied calmly. I thought whoever won the auction would destroy the evidence. The secret would stay buried. But then Ms. Martinez here raised her paddle and everything changed. Everyone looked at Elena. She felt small under their stares. These were powerful people. They could probably destroy her life if they wanted to. But they also looked scared. They needed something from her. My grandmother, Elena said quietly. She kept these copies all these years. Why didn't she ever use them? Why didn't she go to the police or the newspapers? Because she was afraid, Alessandro said bluntly. We told her what would happen if she ever spoke. We have connections, police, judges, politicians. We could have made her life very difficult. We could have hurt her family. Anger flashed through Elena. You threatened her, an old woman who just cleaned your houses? We were protecting billions of dollars, Marcus said. We were protecting our family's reputations. We did what we had to do. You were protecting yourselves, Elena corrected sharply. You didn't care about an innocent woman. You just cared about your money and your power. Nobody argued with that. They all looked guilty. Even Margaret Hartwell, who claimed she wanted the truth to come out, looked uncomfortable. Victoria sat back down. She looked exhausted. So what happens now? You have us all here. You know our secrets. What do you want? Elena hadn't thought that far ahead. She had just wanted to understand. She had wanted to know why her grandmother had been so scared. Now she knew. But what should she do with that knowledge? The documents, Elena said. Where are they now? The ones in the envelope and the copies my grandmother kept? The envelope is in the auction house vault, Margaret answered. Under heavy security. The copies your grandmother kept are presumably in your possession. You said you have boxes of her belongings? Elena nodded. In a storage unit. I've never looked through everything carefully. But I remember seeing old papers and letters. We need those documents, Alessandro said firmly. All of them. The originals and the copies. We'll pay you. Name your price, whatever you want. You want me to sell my grandmother's protection? Elena asked. The thing that kept her safe all these years? She's dead, Marcus said harshly. She doesn't need protection anymore. But you're alive, and you need money, don't you? Teachers don't make much. I know that. We can make you wealthy. Set you up for life. You'd never have to work again. It was tempting. Elena couldn't deny that. She thought about her small apartment and her old car. She thought about her students who needed supplies. She thought about how nice it would be not to worry about money every month. But then she thought about her grandmother. Rosa Martinez had kept those documents for a reason. She had taken a huge risk by not destroying them. She had lived in fear for decades, but she had kept them anyway. Why? What had she wanted Elena to do with them? My grandmother was a good person, Elena said slowly. She worked hard her whole life. She raised my mother alone. She helped raise me. She taught me to be honest and to stand up for what's right. She looked at each of them. You all did terrible things. You broke laws. You hurt people. You made money from stolen goods and illegal weapons, and you've never faced any consequences. You've lived in luxury while my grandmother lived in fear. That was a long time ago, Victoria protested. We were different people then. We've changed. We've donated to charity. We've tried to do good with our money. Have you? Elena challenged. Or have you just bought respectability? You give money to museums and hospitals and put your names on buildings, but you've never admitted what you did. You've never faced justice. Justice? Alessandro laughed coldly. Girl, you don't understand how the world works. People like us don't go to jail. We have the best lawyers. We have friends in every government office. Even if you went to the police with those documents right now, nothing would happen. The crimes are 35 years old. Statutes of limitations have passed. Most of the people involved are dead. The worst that would happen is some bad publicity. Elena's heart sank. Was he right? Would nothing happen even if she exposed them? Margaret Hartwell spoke up. He's mostly right. Legal consequences would be minimal, but the court of public opinion is different. If the truth came out, all of your companies would suffer. Investors would flee. Contracts would be canceled. Your family names would be permanently connected to crime and smuggling. You'd lose your positions in society. Exactly, Alessandro said, which is why we're willing to pay so much to keep it quiet. Elena sat quietly for a long moment. Everyone watched her, waiting for her answer. The room felt heavy with tension. Outside the windows, the city sparkled with lights. Millions of people down there living their normal lives. They had no idea what was happening in this office right now. How much are you offering? Elena finally asked. Alessandro looked relieved. 10 million. Each of us will contribute. That's 30 million total for you. All you have to do is give us the documents and sign a paper saying you'll never speak about this. $30 million. Elena couldn't even imagine that much money. She could quit teaching. She could buy a house. She could help her students and their families. She could do so much good with that money, but something felt wrong. These people had done terrible things and gotten away with it. They had threatened her grandmother. They had built empires on crime and corruption. And now they wanted to pay her to help them hide the truth forever. What if I say no? Elena asked. The room went cold. Marcus Chen's friendly expression disappeared. Victoria Ashford's face hardened. Alessandro Castellano's eyes became dangerous. That would be very unwise, Alessandro said quietly. You're a schoolteacher, Miss Martinez. You live alone in a small apartment. You drive an old car. You're nobody important. If you refuse our generous offer, life could become very difficult for you. Are you threatening me? Elena felt her heart beat faster. The same way you threatened my grandmother? We're explaining reality, Marcus said. We have resources you can't imagine. We can make problems for you. Your job, your apartment, your car. Things can go wrong. Accidents can happen. Margaret Hartwell held up her hand. Stop, all of you. You're proving exactly why this secret should come out. You're still acting like criminals. You're still threatening innocent people to protect yourselves. Stay out of this, Margaret, Victoria snapped. You're one of us. Your father was involved too. Your entire fortune comes from the same place ours does. I know, Margaret said calmly, which is exactly why I understand what needs to happen here. She turned to Elena. Ms. Martinez, I have a different proposal. One that doesn't involve bribing you or threatening you. Alessandro stood up angrily. Margaret, don't sit down, Margaret commanded. Her voice was hard as steel. Alessandro looked surprised, but he sat back down. Margaret clearly had power that even he respected. Margaret opened a drawer in her desk. She pulled out a folder and placed it on the desk. I told you my father made copies of the documents. I've had them for years. I've been trying to decide what to do with them. Tonight, watching all of you panic and bid millions of dollars, I realized something. I'm tired of being part of this lie. She opened the folder. Inside were papers, photographs, and letters. Even from where Elena sat, she could see they looked old and important. These were the copies. The evidence of all the crimes, here's my proposal, Margaret said. Elena's bid of $40 million stands. But she doesn't have to pay it. Alessandro, Marcus, and Victoria, the three of you will split that cost. You'll each pay $13.5 million. That's insane, Marcus said. Why would we pay for something and not get it? Because that $40 million will establish a foundation, Margaret continued. The Rosa Martinez Foundation. It will be dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and helping people who witness corruption, people like Elena's grandmother, who saw something wrong but were afraid to speak up. Victoria laughed bitterly. You want us to fund a foundation that helps people expose people like us? Yes, Margaret said simply. And the documents themselves, both the originals and the copies, will be donated to a journalism school at the university. They'll be sealed for 30 years. After that, they can be used for research and education. 30 years? Alessandro looked thoughtful. Most of us will be dead by then. Exactly, Margaret agreed. You'll be spared the worst embarrassment during your lifetimes, but the truth will eventually come out. History will know what happened. You won't escape judgment completely. Elena listened to all this with growing amazement. Margaret was creating a compromise. The billionaires wouldn't face immediate public shame, but the truth wouldn't stay buried forever. And the money would help other people who found themselves in situations like her grandmother's. What about us? Marcus gestured to himself and the others. We just pay and hope the documents stay sealed? I'll hold copies too, Margaret said. Insurance like my father did. If any of you try to hurt Elena or interfere with the foundation, I'll release everything immediately. You'll cooperate or you'll be exposed. Those are your choices. Alessandro rubbed his face with his hands. He looked older than ever. This is blackmail. Call it whatever you want, Margaret replied. But it's better than what you deserve. You've lived free and wealthy for 35 years. You're getting away with it mostly. The least you can do is fund something that helps others. Victoria stood up and walked back to the windows. She was quiet for a long time, looking out at the city. Finally, she spoke without turning around. I've lived my entire life afraid of this secret coming out. Every day wondering if today would be the day. Maybe Margaret's right. Maybe 30 years of peace is worth $13 million. Easy for you to say, Marcus muttered. Your company is more stable than mine. This kind of publicity could destroy me, even if it's delayed. Then you should have thought of that before you helped your father smuggle weapons. Victoria shot back. Marcus glared at her but said nothing. He knew she was right. Alessandro was the last to speak. He looked at Elena for a long moment. Your grandmother, he said quietly. She was braver than we gave her credit for. She could have exposed us at any time. She could have destroyed everything. But she didn't. Why? Elena thought about that. I think she wanted to protect my mother. And later me. If she exposed you, you might have hurt us. She chose her family over justice. And now you have the same choice, Alessandro said. You could take the money and run. $30 million. No foundation, no sealed documents. Just disappear and live well. Or you can do what Margaret suggests and get nothing yourself. It was the final test. Elena understood that. They wanted to see if she was like her grandmother, if she could be bought. Or if she was different, Elena thought about her students. She thought about the families she taught, struggling to pay rent and buy food. She thought about her grandmother, living in fear but keeping those documents safe anyway. What would Rosa want her to do? I want the foundation, Elena said firmly. $40 million to help people who speak up about corruption. The documents sealed for 30 years at the journalism school. And I want something else too. What? Alessandro asked warily. I want a scholarship program included in the foundation. For children from poor families. Kids like my students. Kids like my mother was. They should have the same opportunities rich kids have. Margaret smiled. It was a real smile, warm and approving. I like that addition. Agreed. Wait, we haven't agreed to any of this, Marcus protested. Then I'll release the documents tomorrow, Margaret said calmly. Your choice, Marcus. Pay $13 million and get 30 years of peace or refuse and face immediate exposure. I'm done negotiating. Elena watched as Marcus struggled with himself. His face showed his internal battle. Finally, he slumped in his chair. Fine, agreed. Victoria nodded from her position by the window. Agreed. Everyone looked at Alessandro. He was the oldest, the one who had the most to lose. His father had started everything. The Castellano name was on all the documents. He would be remembered as the son of a criminal, but he was also old enough to be tired. Elena could see it in his eyes. He was exhausted from decades of hiding and lying and threatening people. Maybe he wanted it to end too. 30 years, he said slowly. You promise the documents stay sealed that long? I promise, Margaret said, unless any of you break our agreement. Then all bets are off, Alessandro nodded. Then I agree. But I want one thing too. What? Margaret asked. He looked at Elena. I want to apologize to you. And to your grandmother, even though she's gone. We treated her terribly. We threatened her and made her live in fear. That was wrong. I can't change the past, but I can say I'm sorry. Elena was surprised. Of all the things she expected, a genuine apology wasn't one of them. Alessandro's eyes looked sad and regretful. Maybe he really meant it. Or maybe it was just another manipulation. She couldn't tell. Thank you, Elena said quietly. I think my grandmother would have appreciated hearing that. Margaret pulled out papers from her desk drawer. I had my lawyers draw these up this afternoon. I suspected we might need them. These are agreements establishing the foundation, creating the scholarship program, and arranging for the documents to be donated to the university. You'll all sign these tonight. You planned this? Victoria looked shocked. Before the auction even started? I've been planning this for 5 years, Margaret admitted. Since my father died, I was just waiting for the right moment. When I saw Elena raise her paddle tonight, I knew it was time. So Margaret had orchestrated everything. She had put the envelope in the auction, knowing it would create chaos. She had been ready with a solution. She had used Elena's unexpected bid to force everyone's hand. It was impressive, really. Margaret had managed to get justice, or at least a version of it, without destroying anyone completely. The lawyers came in with the papers. Everyone read them carefully. Marcus and Victoria signed first. Alessandro hesitated, his pen hovering over the signature line. Then he signed too. Finally, Margaret and Elena both signed as witnesses and foundation board members. It was done. The Rosa Martinez Foundation was real. $40 million would help people tell the truth about corruption. Scholarships would help poor children go to college. And the documents that had controlled her grandmother's life were finally going somewhere safe. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in front of her classroom. Her second-grade students were working on math problems, their heads bent over their papers. Sunlight came through the windows and made patterns on the floor. Everything looked normal. But Elena's life was completely different now. She had spent the past weeks going through her grandmother's boxes. She found the letters and documents just as she remembered. The wax seal matched the one on the auction envelope perfectly. She also found a journal her grandmother had kept. Reading it had made Elena cry. Rosa Martinez had written about her fear. She had written about the threats the Castellano family made. She had written about her choice to keep the documents hidden instead of destroying them. And she had written about her hope that someday, somehow, the truth would come out safely. She had hoped her granddaughter would be the one to make that happen. You're a smart girl, Elena, her grandmother had written. Smarter than I ever was. If something happens to me, look in the boxes. Find the papers. Use them to help people. Don't let bad men win just because they have money. Her grandmother had known. She had known that Elena would find everything. She had trusted her to make the right choice. That thought made Elena feel proud and sad at the same time. A knock on the classroom door pulled Elena from her thoughts. The principal poked her head in. Ms. Martinez, you have a visitor. Elena walked into the hallway. Margaret Hartwell stood there looking out of place in the simple school building. She wore an elegant business suit and carried a leather briefcase. Some teachers walking by stared at her. Margaret Hartwell was famous in the city. What was she doing at their school? Hello, Elena, Margaret said warmly. I hope I'm not interrupting. No, the students are working independently. What brings you here? Margaret smiled. I wanted to see where you work, and I wanted to give you these. She opened her briefcase and pulled out papers. The foundation is officially established. The money has been transferred. We can start accepting applications from whistleblowers who need protection and support. Elena took the papers. They felt important and official. She saw her name listed as a board member. Margaret Hartwell was the chairman. There were also several lawyers and human rights experts listed. And this, Margaret continued, handing Elena another paper, is the scholarship program. We're calling it the Rosa Martinez Scholars. It will provide full college scholarships to 50 students each year. Students from low-income families who show academic promise. 50 students every year. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Her grandmother's suffering had led to something beautiful. Children who might never have afforded college would now get their chance. There's more, Margaret said gently. The journalism school has accepted the documents. They're being cataloged and sealed. A committee will review them in 30 years and decide how to make them public. The truth will come out eventually, just not in a way that destroys everyone immediately. Do you think 30 years is enough? Elena asked. Will people care about crimes that happened 65 years ago? History teachers will care, Margaret replied. Researchers will care, and hopefully it will serve as a lesson that the truth always comes out eventually, that you can't hide behind money forever. Elena nodded. She supposed that was something. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was better than nothing. And the foundation would help people now in the present. That mattered more. I also wanted to ask you something, Margaret said. The foundation needs an executive director. Someone to run the day-to-day operations, review applications, make decisions about who to help. I'd like you to consider the position. Elena was shocked. Me? But I'm a teacher. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know about integrity, Margaret said. You know about standing up for what's right even when it's scary. You know about helping people, because your grandmother taught you that. Those are the important qualifications. We can teach you the rest. What about my students? Elena looked back at her classroom door. I can't just leave them. You wouldn't have to. Not right away. The foundation can operate part-time for now. You could work on it during summer break and evenings. If you decide you love it, you could eventually transition to full-time. But there's no pressure. Think about it. Elena did think about it. She loved teaching. She loved her students. But running this foundation would let her help even more people. She could protect people like her grandmother. She could make sure whistleblowers didn't have to live in fear. It was tempting. Can I have time to decide? Elena asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. Margaret put her papers back in her briefcase. I should let you get back to your class. But before I go, I want to tell you something. What? You impressed me that night at the auction, Margaret said. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose. You could have just sat there quietly. You could have ignored that envelope. But you saw something suspicious and you asked questions. You stood up to billionaires who tried to intimidate you. That takes courage. I was terrified, Elena admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Margaret replied. It's acting despite the fear. Your grandmother had that kind of courage, and so do you. After Margaret left, Elena returned to her classroom. Her students were finishing their math problems. They looked up at her with innocent faces. They had no idea what had happened in the past few weeks. They just knew their teacher was the same kind person she'd always been. But Elena felt different inside. She had discovered secrets. She had faced powerful people. She had honored her grandmother's memory. And she had helped create something that would protect others in the future. That was more than she had ever expected to accomplish. At lunch, Elena sat in the teacher's lounge. She pulled out her phone and looked at news articles. The auction had made the news, but not for the reasons she expected. The story said that a mystery bidder had helped raise record amounts for charity. There was no mention of the Castellano collection. No mention of the fight over the envelope. Margaret must have controlled what the press learned. One article mentioned the new Rosa Martinez Foundation. It said the foundation was funded by generous donations from the Hartwell, Castellano, Chen, and Ashford families. It listed the foundation's mission to protect whistleblowers. Elena smiled at that. Anyone reading the article would think these families were being noble and charitable. They would never know the real story. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. The message said, Ms. Martinez, this is Alessandro Castellano. I wanted to thank you for your discretion. What happened stays between us, as agreed. But I also wanted to say something else. Your grandmother was right to keep those documents. We deserve to face consequences. I'm glad that in some small way we finally are. The foundation is good work. I hope it helps many people. Elena stared at the message. She didn't know if Alessandro was being sincere or just trying to stay on her good side. Maybe it was both. But it was something. An acknowledgement that they had been wrong. She typed back, Thank you for your message. I hope you live well with your conscience. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was honest. That felt right. That evening, Elena went to visit her mother. She told her everything that had happened. Her mother listened with wide eyes, shaking her head in disbelief. "Grandma never told me any of this," her mother said. "She just said she had saved money for my college. I never knew where it really came from." "She was protecting you," Elena replied, "and protecting me. She kept the secret so we would be safe. I wish I could thank her," her mother said sadly. "I wish I could tell her that her sacrifice meant something." "I think she knows," Elena said softly. "The foundation is named after her. Her story will help people." That's what she wanted. 2 months passed. Elena continued teaching, but she also started working with the foundation. She learned about nonprofit management. She reviewed applications from people who had witnessed corruption and needed help. Some were employees who had seen their companies breaking laws. Some were government workers who had discovered fraud. Some were ordinary people who had accidentally learned dangerous secrets. Each application broke Elena's heart a little. These people were all like her grandmother. They had seen something wrong and wanted to do something about it, but they were afraid. The foundation helped them find lawyers. It provided financial support so they could afford to lose their jobs. It offered protection and security advice. It made telling the truth less terrifying. One application particularly touched Elena. It was from a woman who worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy family. She had discovered that they were hiding money to avoid paying taxes. She wanted to report it, but she was afraid of losing her job. She had 3 children to support. The foundation helped her hire a lawyer and report the tax fraud anonymously. The family was investigated and had to pay millions in back taxes. The housekeeper kept her job because they never knew who reported them. Elena thought about her grandmother when she approved that application. This was exactly what Rosa would have wanted, helping working people stand up to the rich and powerful, making sure they didn't have to suffer for doing the right thing. The scholarship program also started. 50 students were selected for the first Rosa Martinez Scholars Program. Elena attended the ceremony where they received their award letters. She watched them cry with joy and hug their families. These students would go to college now. They would have opportunities they never dreamed possible. One student, a girl named Maria, came up to Elena after the ceremony. "Thank you so much," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "My mom works 3 jobs. We could never afford college. This scholarship changes everything." Elena hugged her. "Work hard and make the most of this opportunity. That's the best way to honor it." "I will," Maria promised. "I want to be a lawyer. I want to help people like my mom who work so hard but don't have anyone to protect them." Elena thought about how her grandmother would have loved to meet Maria. Rosa had worked hard all her life too. She had done difficult, thankless work. But she had been brave when it mattered, and now her bravery was helping people like Maria. 6 months after the auction, Elena made her decision. She told her principal she would be leaving teaching at the end of the school year. She would become the full-time executive director of the Rosa Martinez Foundation. It was a hard decision. She loved teaching, but the foundation needed her, and she could help more people there. Her students cried when she told them. She cried too. But she promised to visit, and she promised that everything she had taught them about honesty and courage and standing up for what's right was important. She told them that sometimes doing the right thing was scary, but it was always worth it. On her last day of teaching, Elena received a package. Inside was a handwritten letter from Victoria Ashford. Elena was surprised. Victoria was one of the billionaires from that night. What could she want? The letter said, "Dear Ms. Martinez, I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the auction. I've lived my whole life trying to hide my father's crimes. I've spent millions of dollars protecting a secret that made me sick with guilt. When you stood up that night, I thought you were going to destroy everything. But you didn't. You created something good instead. I want you to know that the foundation has inspired me. I'm planning to establish my own charity to help children of incarcerated parents. I can't undo what my father did, but I can try to help people who suffer because of crime. Thank you for showing me a better way." Elena reread the letter several times. Maybe people could change. Maybe facing the truth, even partially, made a difference. Victoria wouldn't go to jail. She would keep her wealth and her comfortable life. But at least she was trying to do something good with it now. That was more than she had done before. 1 year after the auction, Elena stood at the university journalism school. They were having a ceremony to mark the acceptance of the sealed documents. In 30 years, scholars would open them and study them. The truth about the Castellano smuggling operations would finally be public. The dean of the journalism school gave a speech. These documents represent an important piece of our city's history. They show us that crime and corruption can't stay hidden forever. They remind us that ordinary people like Rosa Martinez can be heroes. By keeping these records safe, she ensured that the truth would eventually come out. Elena thought about her grandmother. Rosa had been a simple woman. She had cleaned houses and done laundry. She hadn't finished high school. But she had been brave. She had stood up to powerful people. And 35 years after she made that choice, her granddaughter had finished what she started. After the ceremony, Elena visited her grandmother's grave. She brought fresh flowers and sat on the grass next to the headstone. The cemetery was quiet and peaceful. Birds sang in the trees. A gentle breeze blew through the grass. "I did it, Grandma," Elena said softly. "I found your papers. I learned what happened, and I made sure it meant something. There's a foundation with your name. There are scholarships for kids like Mom was. People are being helped because you were brave." She sat there for a long time, remembering her grandmother. The way she had told stories, the way she had made special cookies, the way she had always said that kindness and honesty were the most important things in life. Elena's phone buzzed. It was Margaret Hartwell. "Another whistleblower application just came in. High priority. Can you review it this afternoon?" Elena smiled. "I'll be there in an hour." She stood up and brushed grass off her pants. She kissed her fingers and touched her grandmother's headstone. Then she walked back to her car. She had work to do, people to help, truth to protect. The luxury auction had been 1 year ago. It had started as a simple mistake, a wrong invitation delivered to the wrong address. But that mistake had changed everything. It had exposed decades-old secrets. It had brought justice, even if it was delayed justice. And it had created a foundation that would help people for generations. Elena had been just a simple schoolteacher. She had walked into that ballroom not knowing what she would find. She had raised her hand without thinking about the consequences. And somehow that simple action had brought down walls of lies and fear. As she drove away from the cemetery, Elena thought about that night. The crystal chandeliers, the elegant people, the mysterious envelope. The moment she raised paddle 63. Everything had changed in that moment, not just for her but for everyone involved. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply raise your hand and ask questions. Sometimes being ordinary was exactly what the world needed. The billionaires had panicked that night because they weren't prepared for someone like Elena, someone who didn't care about fitting in, someone who just wanted to know the truth. And the truth, Elena had learned, always mattered, even when it was scary, even when powerful people tried to hide it. The truth would always find a way out. Sometimes it took 35 years. Sometimes it took a simple woman raising her hand at an auction. But it always came out eventually. Elena smiled as she drove toward the foundation office. Her grandmother would be proud, and that was all that really mattered.